Hi everyone, I'm Nathan Hawthorne, a comic artist and secondary school art teacher, here to talk to you about visual libraries. And today we're going to be talking about something called secondary sources. Now this is the third video in the visual library series, so if you haven't watched the other two, you might want to head over to those videos and watch those first. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can find the links in the description below. So, just a quick reminder of what a visual library is before we start. I believe in my first video I described it as the intangible collection of images held within an artist's memory that may consist of patterns, objects, photos, pictures, paintings, people and other things that the artist has seen and visually studied over their lifetime. And I think that covers it quite well, so we'll stick with that definition. So now that we've spoken about why you need to build your visual library and about primary sources, those sources that are straight out of the real world and that you meet face to face, now we can talk about secondary sources. And when we talk about secondary sources, they're the ones where you take inspiration from the great stuff that other people have created. So let's see what we can look at, where we can get those secondary sources from. So, number one, folk and fairy tales. Now these cross over slightly with primary sources since they are the backbones of most cultures and societies. But folk tales and fairy tales, myths and legends have formed the backbone of so many great pieces of entertainment in the last 100 years or so that it would be very unwise to ignore them. So while you're out building your visual library with primary sources at the museums and libraries, make sure to look up the stories behind those Greek statues or those Ashanti artifacts and so on. Although this may not directly fuel your visual library with objects and things visually, it does fill it with scenes and descriptions that can later on be put to use. So for example, have you ever heard of the Aztec god Tonatiuh? It took 3 gods sacrificing themselves for him to rise to the position of sun god. Now imagine that scene. There, that idea, that description, and maybe even some versions of that visual are now in your visual library. So that's pretty cool, isn't it? Number 2, film or movies and TV. And this includes animation as well. So through television and particularly film, you can learn a whole deal from the set design, from the costume design, the makeup and so on. Especially from live action films and the fact that things have to be able to work and function in real life to some degree, so things have to make sense. So for example, armor or weapons, they have to be practical, they have to be able to be held and used. Something that we can sometimes take for granted in animation or in comics and things like that. We don't always think about whether the thing will work and how practical it is, but if you analyze things in film, TV and in plays and stuff like that, then you see it working because the person is using it. So when you watch things, pay attention to what people are wearing, how it's designed, how it's probably been put on and how it works with the world around it, how it interacts. Also think carefully about how the camera, the lighting, the framing are being used in the scene. Pay close attention to what the creators are doing visually to further the story and get you emotionally invested. Remember, that's what you want if you're telling a story. You want people to be emotionally invested, to enjoy it, to really feel for the characters, for the world and the things that are going on. Once you've got those visuals stored, you can then draw on them anytime and you'll be miles ahead of your peers if you've really locked down on what film and TV use to get that craft working. On to number 3, comics and illustrated stories. Now both of these rely heavily on visuals to tell a story and embed themselves in a viewer's memory. If you really like a particular comic or story, think to yourself why it is that you like that story so much or that you like that comic so much. Is it the composition, the colours, the expressions on the faces, the detail or lack of detail? Whatever it is, there is no one way to do this, which means that there's so many different methods for you to actually play with. So grab the ones that you need and see what bits you can combine and put into your own creations to make them special and have the same impact on others that that comic that you drew on had on you. Video games. Number 4. Video games are basically interactive movies, so you can learn pretty much the same thing from them as I mentioned a few moments ago in film and TV. The only thing that I would say to watch out for with video games is that you need to pay attention to how characters interact with the world and what methods the creators are using to make you feel like you are that character and make you feel what the character feels. The way that the character pushes themselves, handles their equipment, and simple visual cues like that can make you as a player feel a certain way, and is therefore extremely useful imagery to keep in your visual library. Now please bear in mind, I'm not talking about every single type of game here. I'm talking about mostly AAA games and ones that are very story focused. Most games are really good for drawing on, but when it comes to those ones which are very story focused and AAA where you can see that I've spent a lot of time making sure that you can see all the different emotions, that all the animations are very specifically done and have taken them years to do, that's where you can really draw on the stuff that drags you into the story, gets you emotionally invested. But there's no hard fast rule to this. Maybe even a game of Tetris has that sort of depth to it. It all depends on you. Number 5, artwork. Now when I say artwork, I mean all of it, ranging from the old masters to the cool kids from Comic-Con who draw anime and manga and all sorts of stuff. Now all of this stuff is inspiration that you can deposit into your visual library and draw on at any time. Now I know that down to this day I still take a lot of inspiration from artists who created work around the sublime, people like John Martin or Caspar Friedrich Jr. and others from the Romantic period. But at the same time, I really like the artwork of more recent concept artists like Daniel Dochu and Kekai Kotaki and loads of other visual illustrators and concept artists. Now I've taken a lot of influence from such a large variety of artists and from such a large variety of styles and time periods as well. Don't just limit yourself to just one small one. If you limit yourself like that, then you're limiting your reach and you're limiting your knowledge as well, and sort of things that you're capable of creating. Alright, so look into all artwork, become a true art student. So there we have our 5 secondary sources for our visual library. Draw on them as you will, study them as you will, but in your final pieces, in your projects and so on, make sure you do not copy. Remember, copying has its place, especially when you're practicing and studying, but when it comes to your final pieces and someday the work that you'll be getting paid for, make sure you're stealing the great parts and ideas and combining them, adding to them, twisting and warping them until you end up with something that is truly amazing and truly you. So that's the end of this 3-part visual library series. Just to recap, we looked at why you should build your visual library. We looked at primary sources, so going up to things, seeing them firsthand and getting inspiration from that, and of course we just looked at secondary sources as well. So hopefully that's given you a good idea of what we mean when we talk about visual libraries, how you can build and make use of yours, and will give you a good library to go on and build and work from to create some really good and amazing work. So if you have any questions or picked up on anything that I missed, please just drop it down in the comments, and please don't forget to like and subscribe or follow for more great content. So that's all for now, until next time.